Well, welcome. It depending on where the conversation goes, this may be either a short or a long meeting, but I'm going to just quickly go through this, our second to last meeting, and talk to you about our last meeting a bit. So a couple of things that I'm asking if you would consider doing is to prepare for our last meeting. I have a Qualtrics survey posted in the active module now, and a link to it. And it looks much like the survey you took at the beginning of our community of practice. It's the same questions, actually. So if you would consider going and filling that out, I would appreciate it. Then if you have any resources or links that you think are critical for us to share beyond the community of practice, it would be great if you email them to me. I'll compile them and get them prepared for our last session. And then think about what you want or need moving forward. So what are we done? Do we walk away? Do we continue? If we continue, what does it look like? What do you need? What do you want? So if you folks could think about that, that would be great. And then come prepared to just have that discussion. In addition to that, I would like to, next time we meet, I would like to discuss with whoever participates the following 3 questions. So what if any parts of this community of practice were of value to you during the year? How has participation in the community of practice changed you? And what difference has this community of practice made to your practice or life or context? So that's what I would like to do on our final meeting, is kind of wrap up and figure out where we're going to go and what's going to happen next. And with that, basically for this time, we asked that you identify a threshold that was getting in the way of student learning, to plan a learning activity that introduces a threshold, describe how you'll integrate it, and how you might assess that. So what did you do and what do you want to talk about this week? So it's sharing and discussion time.
Yeah, so I was realizing I think it was just on Thursday last week, that I haven't really implemented anything in the current class. Because I've been thinking so much about how to get students to go to the literature early and start when they're writing a research proposal, like that should be born of the literature almost. And so right now in the class, they're writing up their final papers, and because I've been more or less just keeping all of my thoughts to myself, they still don't know how to do it, and like they're still going to the literature almost as an afterthought. And I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't talked to you guys about that yet, which caught me off guard. And all of a sudden, I'm like, okay, I know what to do now. But then, yeah, hadn't actually planned anything for this late in the semester. All of my interventions that I was planning were for early in the semester to get them into the habit early, which will be great in the fall, but not as useful right now.
Dustin, can I ask you a question real quick?
Sure.
Did you reach out to your liaison librarian? And if so, like, were they, hey, this is great, I've been waiting for this opportunity, or?
Yeah, so I reached out to, so there's, UVU has a science-specific librarian, and he just seemed less enthusiastic about everything.
Okay.
But then there was another librarian, I forgot what her specialty was, but when I finally got a hold of her, then she arranged a lunch meeting, got the science librarian into it, and we had a really good meeting where we discussed a lot of different things, some ideas, and yeah, probably in the, yeah, I I didn't follow through as much as I could have. We were talking about possibly just sending the students to the library. So my section right now only has 2 students in it. So it would be easy to send them to the library and have them have a one-on-one conversation or a 2-on-1 conversation and iron out a lot of things there. But yeah, there were just other things going on in the class, and I wasn't able to make that happen.
And part of why I asked that is because when I watched your Flipgrid, I mean, I think I could talk to our chemistry faculty who would say the exact same thing. We have not, as librarians, I don't think, have really gotten traction on having people start their questions from the literature, from the known literature, right? Like, I mean, that's that
Right.
key behavior. And so I think there's a lot of work that could be done there for sure. So I don't know if you ever wanted to connect me with that person, but I have a feeling, Sylvia was kind of saying that what people are doing is kind of in isolation. And here's a really good example where I don't have something in my back pocket that would help to address that. But if someone did, I'd love to hear about it, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it's easy. I don't think it's open a box and
Yeah.
pull out that lesson from a librarian perspective.
Right. And I mean, the strategies that I've been thinking of are a lot more along the lines of just breaking down that. So one of the first assignments in the class is going to be writing a research proposal, and breaking that apart into smaller pieces where making it explicit, saying, this is your annotated bibliography. Yes, a proposal needs to have an annotated bibliography. Write it first before you do anything else.
So, Dustin, I have, you actually helped me, you and Harry, your discussion a couple weeks ago, helped me recognize something, and it had to do with the annotated bibliography. But you two were talking about getting students to go engage with the literature, etc. And I was telling Kristen earlier that I had a weekend workshop with grad students, and I was asking them why they were having such difficulty with their citations, because I had given them CiteFast and they were working on an annotated bibliography, and I had 12 or 15 students, but when I took all of their work and copied their reference list into one long document, arranged them alphabetically, and then went through and looked for appropriate citations, I had 12 pages of incorrect citations. It wasn't a few. It was like, oh my goodness. And I asked them, why are you having this much difficulty? And they said, it isn't that we can't use CiteFast, and it isn't that we don't get the citation process, but we don't know what the sources we're looking at are. Are they news articles? Are they books? And so that led me to this kind of aha moment where I grew up with a card catalog and watched it morph from the card catalog to an online, computerized catalog, and I'm pretty able to figure out what a journal article is and what a book is, and because I've watched the technology morph. But for folks who haven't watched that process, they have a really hard time differentiating between a journal article that they get online from a library versus a journal article, and it actually is, it is online through a computer, but they're looking at a library database, and they can't differentiate that library database from an online Google search. They can't differentiate a newspaper from a blog post. So I actually am looking to put in one assignment, getting them to identify what the sources are before they do the annotated bibliography. I put a Flipgrid post in and I have a slide if you want to see the resources here too. But for me, I was listening to you and Harry talk and then reflecting on that conversation. I'm like, oh, this is some expertise blindness going on, and I've got to fix it, because they don't have that step to do the annotated bibliography even. So the annotated bibliography helped, but I still hadn't gotten there.
Yeah. So as you were talking about that, I mean, at first I was thinking that's not very useful in physics, just because, I mean, if you're using like personal correspondence in physics, you're doing it wrong. But as you talked about it, like describing the difference between like a news article and a journal article or a blog post or something like that, like I realized, yeah, that might be something useful, like the difference between a peer-reviewed journal and, a popular science magazine,
Mm-hmm.
which has a huge difference in credibility and usefulness. Yeah, that might be something that I should investigate, whether or not my students have that same shortcoming.
So, and even, I haven't done it for a while, but even a couple years ago, I found a website that had a list of fake websites on it. And the students are pretty good about the Northwest tree octopus. They're like, yeah, that's fake. But there was one article in there, and I wanted to laugh, but it was so sad. There was one in there where they had a guy in a tinfoil hat, and talking about making sure that alien communication didn't interfere with his thoughts. And then they had an oscilloscope and lots of graphs, and then they had another graph with lots of data. And most people, 80% said, yeah, it's fake. But there was a handful that said, look at all the graphs and the data. It's got to be true. And I'm thinking, okay, come on, you folks. There's a graph and data, but mind you, they've got a tinfoil cone on their head, so aliens won't talk to them. I mean, really. So.
Well, and
I gotta learn not to be surprised.
Well, it even goes deeper than that, because I mean, for my students that are trying to do scientific writing, I would consider the New York Times a bad source, because their science is terrible. They have a lot of journalists trying to write science, and they just get things wrong all the time. It might be really good in political science or history or some other fields, but for physics, the New York Times is just as bad as the guy in the tinfoil hat.
Yeah, and
maybe not that bad, but
that speaks to the authority. The authority is contextual kind of thing.
Yeah.
Sylvia, when in watching your Flipgrid too, what I was thinking about is that as there's this push for open access and scholarly communication, that a lot of websites have things that are called scholarly projects, dissertations, that don't quite meet the criteria of a published dissertation, for example. So yeah, I'll have students, they found something that looks really scholarly and credible on a website, and they want to know how to cite it. And some of them are really slick looking. So I think it has gotten more difficult for sure, even just past general websites now, that you can find scholarly information in a lot of different formats. And yeah, how do you judge if they're useful or not, the student?
So I have another question that's been gnawing at me for a bit, Kristen, and it's for you. So it's the idea about working with librarians as a faculty member. I want to know, from your point of view, differentiating working with, I don't know how to articulate this very well, but it's a difference between sending students to the library to get help versus sending students to the library after faculty members have collaborated and there's a clear partnership going on,
Yeah.
versus collaborating with a librarian to really make an experience worthwhile. Because I'm just looking at from my past experience, somehow I'm a little bit troubled by, I'm going to just send them to the library to get help. And so, yes, I'm working with my librarian and we have a relationship. I'm like, I'm not sure. That for me, that's troublesome. So I don't know if you can speak to that, or librarians' wishes or ideas.
Mm-hmm.
It's just been something I've looked at, and I don't feel comfortable with just send students to the library, and that's how I'm going to work with my librarian.
Yeah, for sure. That's not the ideal. And I think it does depend on the institution, but probably it's similar in your institution. We aren't subject experts. We don't have master's degrees in what we're giving library sessions about. Even if we're the liaison, we might have some affinity or some specialized knowledge in the searching aspect, but I think we are kind of doing best guesses sometimes when we answer questions for students. And so if you send your students to us without really telling us what you value and what's important, and how you approach whatever it is, the students are gonna get, I think they're gonna get sub ideal information. It's going to fall short for them. So that's why, to me, I don't think you could really over communicate with the librarian, and it's definitely iterative. I mean, there's this one faculty person I work with that we look at what students have turned in together, so I can see where my teaching has missed the mark, and then we'll try to address that. So I think having that communication through the whole process is super helpful. So does that answer your question?
I think so. And I think it goes back to earlier conversations that Jesse and Dustin were having, and I think you were there as well, Kristen, talking about, like, so when Dustin went to get help from the librarian, how do you find the right librarian at an institution? Because it might not be your, as Dustin found out, it might not be your subject matter librarian. It might be the instructional librarian, or but just so as a
I mean, our jobs have gotten a lot harder too, and I think that not everybody has upskilled to that. It used to be that checklists, and if you had, I laugh because if you knew your thesaurus for psych info, you were golden. Like that's what you needed to know. And now that's only a tiny piece of what you need to know as a librarian. So I think the librarians aren't really comfortable with stepping into what's needed in this information universe that we have now too.
So
but I would keep at it, and I think, I love your story, Dustin, because you kind of, you found someone who was willing to meet with you. And I think those meetings are it'll have to be several meetings, and really scaffolding, that scaffolding work that you're doing it really should be done in tandem with the librarian, because we know maybe what tools will help the students in learning their way around the subject area.
Dustin, do you have other questions or comments or?
Not really. I mean, based on everything we've been talking about, I've put together what I think is a good plan for when I can implement everything in the fall. And then I really need that to fail before I'll know what the next questions are.
Failure is a great learning opportunity.
And Dustin, I predict you will get some pushback from your students. I mean, there are faculty that used to require more in-depth research, and on their student evaluations, they're like, this doesn't help me, you're wasting my time. And some faculty have kind of backed off of their expectations for research, which is really sad.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've got it packaged well where I'm motivating it as, this semester we're going to go through the entire scientific process of an experiment, from getting the idea to publishing it. And I don't know, right? So as I've been testing it out on my 2-student section right now, they're really buying into it really well.
Nice.
So
what kind of feedback have you gotten from them?
I mean, it's just the 3 of us in class. And so sometimes they'll just, as we're talking, they're like, yeah, I've really enjoyed this. Like, this has been a lot better than the other lab classes I've had. And I like just the freedom of being able to do whatever we want to do research in. Not so much about the details of it, but just the bigger picture, like how I've taken things apart and how I've put things back together. So, I mean, when I start pushing them more into the literature, yeah, you might be right. They might push back against that, unless I can. And at that point, if that happens, I would say that I need to do a better job of. I mean, it turns into the scholarship is conversation and authority is contextual. Like, why do we need to have citations to begin with? And why do the citations have to be from these really hard to read journal articles?
I liked the scholarship as conversation. I framed my annotated bibliography assignment within that. You are becoming part of the conversation. Yeah. And I think I got a few comments back relative to that at the end of the semester that I figured out by doing this research project that I contributed to the conversation. I'm like, ooh, at least they listened in class. They may be regurgitating it, but at least they're regurgitating the right stuff. So they made some connections, I think, that resonated with them, because I think students ultimately like to feel empowered and they have decisions. So framing it within that context, I think, is helpful.
I was wondering about that, Dustin. Were you going to have the students write a self-reflection on how they're contributing to the conversation? Or because you were talking about that rubric, and I don't know if they're going to go, oh, here's a conversation happening, and then be able to quite realize how they, you know what I mean? I was kind of wondering about that little.
Yeah. That's a good idea. I think that might work better than having them rubric themselves.
Yeah, I was a little worried about that.
Yeah.
But
I like that self-evaluation idea. I think that's probably better.
I've found I don't know if it helps the students, but it helps me see how they're thinking when I have them reflect specifically on a question like, how did that activity have you contribute to a scholarly conversation, and explain why or why not. I can see those who think shallowly, those who've given it a lot of thought, those who are jumping through hoops, but it makes them at least stop and pause and ask the question. So,
well, and also I can see it just leading towards the rest of the project for me, because if this is so they're I mean, I'm hoping to do all of this early in the semester when they're still writing their proposal. But if I can say, the research that you're about to do, write a self-reflection about how this is going to contribute to the conversation, that really directs the research project into something that's valuable.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not going to contribute to the conversation, why are you doing it?
Yeah. That's a good idea.
Neat.
I'd be interested in hearing how it turns out.
Yeah, me too.
Other things you want to talk about? This is your time to ask questions, process, etc. All right. Well, if not, the item that I talked about, and it's in my Flipgrid post, is this sorting machine. So the item I'm taking a look at came from it's the APRL sandbox, and I found some interesting different lessons there. And this sorting machine basically has students sort different sources, and I think it only takes a few minutes. So the lesson plan says. I think I'm going to use that before I introduce the annotated bibliography, and it's just bringing a bunch of sources or cards and have students sort where the source belongs. And so if you get a whole lot of cards and at least one per student, maybe two or three, and get them to source and discuss, I think that might make an interesting discussion topic that will help them do the annotated bibliography. I don't think it's going to take that long, and hopefully it'll add insight. So my final end product will be to see how they actually use CiteFast then to cite sources. So that was my input for the week. Anyway, so here's where we're at. Our current module, I updated it again this morning with some questions, and that was the ones that I gave you back at the beginning, which is just how does the community of practice impact you? At this point in time, what I'm asking folks to do is think about the impacts, and then again go online and take that Qualtrics survey. If you so choose, you don't have to, but that's the kind of thing that Jesse and I will use to evaluate how the community of practice went, next steps, etc. And then the next time we meet is going to be our final module for this. So just really give some thought about what you need, what you want. Come prepared to lay it all out, and we'll plan accordingly from there. Questions, concerns, comments before we sign off? All right. Well, thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Dustin. I appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I hope you have a good week, and I hope all you get sunshine. We finally have warm weather and sunshine here. It's really nice.
No kidding.
So, and it's late when I wake up, and it's late after I get home from work. So I'm pretty excited.
Indeed.
So, all right.
All right.
Thanks,
So long.
Kristen. Thanks, Dustin.
Thanks.
Have
Bye.
a good one. Bye.
You too.